The wheels jolted against the rocky mountaintop. Metal screamed as the small Fiesler Phi 156 Storch rolled forward, its nose dipping dangerously toward the void. There was no runway, just a patch of dirt barely longer than the length of the plane itself. Beyond it, nothing but air, and the jagged teeth of the Apennine Mountains waiting below. Inside, 3 men were crammed into a cockpit designed for 2. At the front, the pilot's knuckles were white against the stick. Behind him sat a gaunt, pale-faced prisoner in a rumpled uniform, Benito Mussolini, the once swaggering Duce of Italy, now reduced to a shadow of power. And next to him, towering over both men, was Otto Skorzeny, the Waffen-SS commando whose name was whispered in Allied briefings as if he were some phantom out of legend. The pilot had protested before takeoff. 3 men were too much weight. The air here was thin, the drop steep, the space unforgiving. But Skorzeny had pressed a pistol into the man's ribs and spoken quietly, "We take off together, or not at all." The plane's tail lifted as they neared the edge. The pilot yanked back hard. For a breathless second, nothing happened, then the mountain fell away beneath them. The Storch plunged nose first into the void. Gravity took hold, and the wind howled against the fuselage. Mussolini's face went white. The pilot cursed. Skorzeny's jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the horizon. Then, impossibly, the wings caught air. The aircraft leveled, the engine screamed, and the nose pulled up. They were flying, barely. Below, the mountain fortress that had been Mussolini's prison was shrinking into the distance. To understand how they had ended up on that mountaintop, and why Nazi Germany had risked one of the most insane rescues in history, we have to rewind 2 months. It was the summer of 1943. The Mediterranean was collapsing under Allied pressure. Sicily had fallen, and Italy's navy was a wreck. Rome was being bombed not to destroy its factories, but to destroy its will to fight. Mussolini's promises of an Italian empire had turned to ash. His soldiers were exhausted, his citizens starving, his generals disillusioned. The Italian king had made his move. Mussolini was arrested, stripped of his power, and hidden away in a secret location. For Adolf Hitler, this was not just an insult, it was a disaster. If Italy switched sides, Germany's southern flank would be wide open. But Hitler had an answer. One man, one mission, one chance. Finding Mussolini was like chasing a ghost. The Italians knew the Germans would try to get him back, and they weren't taking chances. The former dictator was shuttled from one secret location to another. Naval bases, remote islands, guarded villas, each move designed to throw German intelligence off the scent. The Allies were advancing, the Italian government was stalling for time, and every passing day brought the armistice closer. For Hitler, every day Mussolini stayed missing was another day Italy slipped from his grasp. And so he gave the job to the one man whose mix of cunning, ruthlessness, and sheer audacity seemed tailor-made for the task. Otto Skorzeny. Skorzeny didn't begin with brute force. He began with shadows. Disguised in civilian clothes, he prowled the streets of Italian cities. He bribed officials with counterfeit British pounds, part of a secret Nazi project to destabilize the Allied economy. He turned Italian soldiers into informants with promises of gold, cigarettes, and safety. He tapped into intercepted radio traffic, piecing together scraps of conversations. Weeks passed before the trail led to the Apennine Mountains. Somewhere up there, in a luxury ski resort converted into a fortress, Mussolini was being held under the watch of 200 elite Carabinieri guards. The place was called the Hotel Campo Imperatore, a mountaintop stronghold accessible only by a single cable car. It was perfect for a prison, and impossible for a rescue. Any assault via the cable car would turn into a massacre before the gondola reached the top. No paratrooper drop was feasible. The slopes and thin air would kill half the men before they touched ground. Skorzeny studied aerial photographs, weather reports, and Luftwaffe flight logs. He needed a way to appear at the hotel instantly, without warning, close enough to overwhelm the guards before they could even take aim. His answer was as dangerous as it was brilliant. Gliders. Silent, unpowered, and deadly precise in the hands of an expert pilot, a glider could ride the wind straight onto the hotel grounds. But one mistake, one gust of wind, and the craft would slam into the mountain or careen off the edge into the abyss. Even the Luftwaffe's best pilots called it madness. Skorzeny didn't care. The plan was set: 10 gliders, each carrying a pilot and 9 men. Alongside Skorzeny, a special passenger, General Fernando Solidi, a respected Italian officer who might convince the Carabinieri to stand down. At the same time, German paratroopers would seize the cable car station at the mountain's base, cutting off any escape. Everything depended on timing, weather, and the element of shock. There would be no second attempt. The morning of September 12, 1943, dawned thin and cold in the Apennine Mountains. Wind curled around the peaks, and the air was sharp enough to sting the lungs. 4 days, Skorzeny had waited for the right conditions. Now, at last, the weather was clear enough, just barely. 10 lumbering tow planes lifted from the runway, each pulling an unpowered DFS-230 glider behind it. Inside those gliders were 90 Waffen-SS commandos, silent and tense, their eyes fixed on the horizon. In one glider sat Skorzeny himself, next to the Italian general, Solidi. Below them, another force of German paratroopers moved toward the cable car station at the base of the mountain. Their orders were simple: seize it and hold it, no matter the cost. Without that distraction, the guards at the top might move Mussolini before the rescue force arrived. As the gliders climbed, pilots fought the unpredictable mountain winds. 2 tow planes, worried about altitude, began long, looping turns to gain height before release. But Skorzeny's group could not wait. Every minute risked the Italians realizing something was wrong. He ordered his pilot to cut loose. The sudden silence was jarring. No engine, no hum of propellers, only the rush of wind past the glider's thin frame. The mountain loomed ahead like a wall of stone and ice. The pilots wrestled the controls, coaxing the fragile craft through gusts that could snap its wings like matchsticks. Then, impossibly, the hotel grounds came into view, a narrow plateau carved into the mountain's crown. One by one, the gliders skimmed in, their skids scraping over rock and turf. There was no room for error. Overshoot the plateau and they'd plummet off the edge. Come in too short and they'd smash into the slope. Miraculously, the first craft landed cleanly. Then another. Then another. Skorzeny's glider hit hard, the frame shuddering. The men inside slammed against their harnesses. But the craft held, and they tumbled out, weapons ready. Not a shot was fired. General Solidi stepped forward, calling out to the stunned Carabinieri in calm, commanding Italian. "Stand down," he barked. "This is under my authority." The guards hesitated. In that hesitation, Skorzeny moved, straight into the hotel, boots pounding on wooden floors. Mussolini was there, waiting in his room, pale and startled. "Il Duce," Skorzeny said with a half-smile, "the Führer has sent me to free you." Outside, the guards lowered their weapons. The mountaintop fortress had fallen without a single bullet. But the hardest part was still ahead, getting Mussolini off the mountain alive. With Mussolini now in their custody, Skorzeny's men secured the hotel. The operation had taken minutes, faster than anyone had dared hope. But celebration was premature. The mountain was still surrounded by hostile territory, and German troops at the base couldn't protect the summit. Every path down was vulnerable to ambush. The only way out was through the air. From the start, Skorzeny had arranged for a Fearlessness Fi-156 Storch, a slow but nimble reconnaissance plane capable of short takeoffs and landings, to attempt the impossible: land on the tiny plateau, load Mussolini, and get airborne again before enemy reinforcements could arrive. When the pilot touched down, his relief turned to alarm. The landing strip was shorter than expected, hemmed in by sheer drops. Worse, the aircraft could safely carry only 2 people besides the pilot, and Skorzeny insisted on going with Mussolini. The pilot protested. 3 men meant too much weight. The thin mountain air would sap the engine's power. They wouldn't reach takeoff speed before the edge. But Skorzeny was immovable. Mussolini was his responsibility. He would not hand him over to anyone else. "Then we fall together," he said coldly, climbing aboard. The pilot had no choice. The Storch lurched forward, engine straining, its wheels bumping over uneven ground. The end of the plateau was racing toward them. At the last possible moment, the mountain dropped away beneath them, But they were falling, not flying. The nose dipped toward the valley. Air screamed past the cockpit. The pilot fought the controls, heart hammering. Mussolini gripped the seat, frozen. Skorzeny simply stared ahead, jaw set, as if willing the machine to obey. Then, with a shudder, the wings caught lift. The Storch leveled out, its engine clawing for altitude. Below, the fortress that had seemed so impregnable minutes before was now a shrinking speck. They made for Rome first, where Mussolini broadcast his return to the people, though his power was only a shadow of what it had been. Soon after, Skorzeny delivered him to Hitler in Germany. The mission was a propaganda triumph for the Nazis and cemented Skorzeny's reputation as the most dangerous man in Europe. In the years that followed, he would orchestrate more unconventional operations, and, in a twist history could barely have imagined, secretly work with Israel's Mossad to hunt former Nazis. But it was the mountaintop at Gran Sasso, the gliders, and the impossible takeoff that defined him. A mission that should have ended in disaster instead became one of the most daring rescues in military history, pulled off without firing a single shot.